Hi, I'm Mike Pitaro, and I'm an architect with the Revolutionary Cloud Technologies team at Dell. Today, I'm going to show you how to deploy and configure Hadoop on multiple servers using the open source Dell Crowbar platform. We will be starting from bare metal servers and finish up with a complete Hadoop cluster ready to run MapReduce jobs. Installing Crowbar is a straightforward process. You can find the details on the Crowbar Community Wiki on GitHub, as well as links to documentation, video, and pre-built Crowbar install images. Since Crowbar is open source, you can also access the code and developer documentation from this same site. In my case, I've already installed Crowbar on my Crowbar administration node, so I'm going to switch to that and begin the deployment process. This is the Crowbar homepage, which shows the inventory of the nodes that Crowbar is managing. It shows my Crowbar admin node, which I've named HAdmin for Hadoop admin, right here in green, and that means this node is ready to run. It's already been provisioned by Crowbar, and it's ready to manage the rest of my cluster. Off on the left here, I can see 6 more nodes. These ones are all blinking in yellow, which indicates that they've been discovered by Crowbar, but nothing's been done. These are bare metal nodes. All I did was power them on, waited for Crowbar to complete its initial PXE boot and discovery process. And that takes a few minutes, and then finally they appear on the screen. The next step to begin the deployment process is to allocate those nodes in Crowbar. I'm going to do that from the bulk allocate screen since I have 6 nodes. So I'll go to Nodes, select the bulk edit menu option, and then I can allocate my nodes. What I'm doing here is telling Crowbar how to allocate these nodes and specifically how to set some lower level things like BIOS and RAID. So I'm going to walk through my list. One thing I have to worry about here is adding some aliases. I have a little cheat sheet here in front of me that tells me which of these MAC addresses indicate which node. Since I'm deploying Hadoop, I have different types of nodes with slightly different hardware configurations and different cabling, so I need to track which one's which, and I'm not very good at memorizing MAC addresses. So I know on this list my first node is going to be my Hadoop secondary. I'm going to set on this node the BIOS for storage, and I'm going to set the RAID up to be JBOD, and I'm going to click allocate to allocate that node, and then I'll walk through the remaining nodes in this list. My second node here is my Hadoop first slave node. Again, I'm going to set the BIOS to storage, set the RAID. My third node is my HA filer node. The fourth node is my second Hadoop slave. The fifth node is my Hadoop master node. And then the last node in this list is my Hadoop edge node. The last thing I'm going to do here is just quickly review those settings to make sure I have the right aliases in here, and also to make sure that I've got my other settings done, and then I'll click Save. Once I click Save, Crowbar will begin the allocation process of those nodes. Although you can't see it in the background, what's happening is those nodes are actually rebooting and beginning a PXE boot process where Crowbar will go off and configure them and get them ready for Hadoop. This process is going to probably take about 15 minutes for these 6 nodes in my cluster. So while that's happening, I'm going to switch over and go into a few of the details on what Crowbar is actually doing behind the scenes. Crowbar uses a layered approach to systems deployment. So what's really happening here is Crowbar is managing the deployment of these components in different layers. So down from the bottom here we have physical resources where we're configuring the hardware in the machines. Then the next level up is core components, things like operating systems, also operating system infrastructure, things like NTP for time management, logging, DNS, and so on, and of course Crowbar itself. And then finally, on top of that, there will be layers for the specific application Crowbar is deploying. In this case, for big data, we're going to lay down the core Apache Hadoop components, so things like HDFS, HBase, Hive, the Cloudera distribution, pig, and so on. And then at the top level, we also can layer on additional components. Standard with every Crowbar install, we put Nagios and Ganglia in so that we can do performance management and systems monitoring, and also other ecosystem components. Right now, Crowbar has started, as I'm allocating the nodes, it's focusing on the lower two layers here. So it's laying down the physical resources, and it's also putting the operating systems and core DNS and logging and so on. That's the phase it was at right now when I allocated the nodes. Another thing that's interesting about this diagram is each one of these functional pieces, whether it's the network or NTP or DNS, maps within Crowbar to something we call a bar clamp. A bar clamp is the unit in Crowbar we use to manage deployment, and it specifies the software to be installed. It also specifies some of the configuration parameters and provides a UI within the Crowbar framework where you can configure and actually deploy that bar clamp. Now that I've gone through the basics of Crowbar and bar clamps, let me switch back to the screen and let's see what's happening in the background. So here's the screen we had left a moment ago where I could allocate my nodes, and you'll see here it's been updated at the top, and I can see that the node list has been updated. I'm going to clear that message because I don't need to look at it. Instead, I'm going to switch back to the node dashboard and check my current status. Here I can see on the node dashboard the nodes that were previously blinking yellow have now changed. They've stopped blinking, and if I hold my cursor over them, I can see the Crowbar's in the state of building. So it's installed hardware, which means the lowest level BIOS and RAID settings are complete. And then here at the upper layers, I can see I have both hardware installed and, for example, my edge node, or was it my HA filer, is a little ahead. So they're going off and actually doing the deployment phase, but I'm not done. This will all be completed when these nodes turn green. I'm now going to switch to the bar clamp menu up here. There are a couple of options. You can either look at all the bar clamps, the Crowbar specific bar clamps, or the Apache Hadoop bar clamps. I'm going to start with the all bar clamps menu here. When I select this, I'm going to see a list of all the bar clamps that were included in this Crowbar build. You'll notice here at the top there's the Cloudera Manager one. We'll come back to that in a moment. But down here the bar clamps listed in green are the ones that I've already deployed. And these roughly map to the blocks we saw in the previous diagram, so that the different layers of infrastructure that Crowbar is laying down in place. There's no specific bar clamp for an operating system, but you'll see things like Nagios. You'll also see core logging, things like NTP and DNS, all critical components in managing your infrastructure. I can switch over here and I can take a look at the Apache Hadoop bar clamps. The primary one that we're going to be concerned with here in a moment is the Cloudera Manager. I'm going to use Crowbar to deploy the Cloudera Manager out to the individual nodes in my cluster, and then when that process is finished, I'm going to switch over to the Cloudera Manager and finish the installation of the Hadoop cluster. Before I actually begin the process of deploying the Hadoop cluster, I'm going to switch over here and take a look at the individual pieces we're doing, because there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes here. Hadoop itself is a fairly complex system with a lot of moving pieces to install and configure. This is going to be handled by both Crowbar and the Cloudera Manager bar clamp to take care of automating the different pieces that need to be deployed out through a mixture of defaults and automations. A lot of the settings that we're going to be dealing with are based on Dell experiences and best practices, so we pre-configure them, but you can change most of these settings to match your environment. Over here, I'm looking at the Hadoop node architecture, and within Hadoop there are different types of nodes. The master node in Hadoop runs both a job tracker component and a name node component. The job tracker in turn connects to the individual slave nodes that do most of the work within Hadoop, and on each slave node I'll have a task tracker running, and those guys communicate to manage my MapReduce tasks. Hadoop also includes a distributed file system known as HDFS. So on the master node I have a name node that keeps track of the metadata for HDFS, and then on the individual slave nodes there's typically a data node component which is managing the storage on those individual nodes. And then finally within a Hadoop cluster there's normally one or more edge nodes, and the edge nodes are the components that connect the Hadoop cluster to the outside world. So normally the edge node is connected to a corporate LAN or an access LAN the master and slave nodes are all connected on a private network that doesn't have external access. The edge node is going to be running components like Hive and Pig and the HDFS compliant, and also things like Zookeeper for distributed coordination. All of these pieces are tricky to configure, but what's going to happen here between the Crowbar bar clamp and the Cloudera Manager is they'll lay down all the pieces to make sure that everything is synchronized on all these nodes and they all have the exact same configurations. I'm now going to switch back to Crowbar and take a look at the status of my nodes that have been deploying in the background. So I'll go back to the node dashboard and see where things stand. Okay, my nodes have finished deploying, and if I look here in the node dashboard, they're all green and in the ready state. If I were to pick one of these nodes and drill into it like the Hadoop master node, I'll see a status screen within Crowbar that shows me summary of the machine status, and then below here I can see the various bar clamps that have been configured on that node. And you'll see here there's a large amount of infrastructure that was pushed out to that node, but there's nothing Hadoop specific yet. In order to get Hadoop on this node, I'll need to deploy the Cloudera Manager bar clamp. So I'll go up here to the bar clamps menu again, go back to Hadoop, and then I'm going to deploy the bar clamp. To do this, I click on the name of the bar clamp and I create a proposal. This is standard process within Crowbar to create an instance of that template that has all the details. I'm just going to leave the default name of proposal. I'll click on Create Proposal. Once I've created the bar clamp proposal, I can go in here and fill in some of the details. All of these settings have already been picked up and defaulted to reasonable values based on Dell hardware and also best practices we've learned from the community. You can override them if you want. Mostly what I want to do in this Cloudera Manager proposal is go down here and configure the correct nodes. So I've scrolled down to the bottom of the screen. On the left you'll see a number of available nodes. Now you'll know why I named them, so I know which node is which. As I said, I'm not very good with MAC addresses. And then over here at the right, Crowbar has picked some nodes, but I'm not happy with the choices, so I'm going to remove these since I know which nodes I want in each section, and I'm going to rearrange those. I want the Cloudera Manager web app on my Crowbar admin node, so that choice, since Crowbar knows this was the admin node, it already put the web app there. Over here for the master name node, I'm going to pick my master. I'm going to pick my secondary node for the secondary name node and follow the bouncing ball. I'm going to pick my slave nodes. And then finally I'm going to pick my edge node and my HA filer node. So what I've done here is chosen the machines both based on the names I gave them and dropped them into the individual roles that are going to be applied to those machines. Once I'm done with this, I click Apply, and similar to the original allocation of the nodes, Crowbar will immediately begin the process of applying the appropriate software to these nodes. In this case, this isn't going to take very long. Since the operating system and all the other aspects of the configuration have already been pushed out, mostly Crowbar is just going to push out an additional layer here, which will be the Cloudera Manager and also some of the Java components that are needed. So this will only take a moment. Okay, Crowbar has finished applying that proposal, so my screen updated. I can now clear that message, and what's happened on the nodes that I picked is all the software has been updated to deploy the Cloudera Manager. If I go back to the dashboard within Crowbar, I can see the nodes. They're still in the green state, and what I'm going to do is click here on my Hadoop admin node, and I'll notice here that a couple of new components were deployed. You'll notice the Cloudera Manager proposal was applied. And I also have a new link here. These are convenient links that Crowbar adds in the UI. I have a new link to the Cloudera Manager. What I'm going to do is switch to the Cloudera Manager to finish my Hadoop deployment. And then I'll get the Cloudera Manager login screen. You'll notice this is running on the admin node 124.10, but a different port number. I'll log in here using the default password of admin, And in my case, since I'm running the open source versions, I'm not going to upgrade to the full version of Cloudera Manager, but if I had a license key, I could upgrade. I'll just go with the latest free edition, and then I'll walk through the steps here to finish up the deployment. I'm going to skip registration in my case because I've already registered several times, but I recommend you do that when you actually do your install. The first thing I'm going to do here in the Cloudera Manager is discover the remaining hosts. I know that Crowbar actually allocated those IP addresses, so it's going to be 192.168.124 dot, and then starting with 81, and I think I allocated 7 nodes, but I'm just going to specify 81 to 89. And here you can see the nodes that I actually allocated on, and actually it's looking for a couple more because I ran past to 89. But these are the nodes that I'm going to pick. You'll see the fully qualified host name, and also you'll see the actual IP addresses. These other nodes here, they're actually not there. I just put in the longer range. So I'm going to install CDH on those hosts. I'm now going to choose the version of CDH to install. It'll be CDH4. And for the specific versions and releases, rather than installing the latest, I'm going to specify a custom repository. My custom repository is going to be a URL on the Crowbar admin node, 124.10, and I'm specifying CentOS 6.2 Crowbar Extra Apache Hadoop. The reason I've specified this repository is Crowbar is a self-contained system. It doesn't rely on external network access to pull down these packages. So when we installed Crowbar, a repository with the tested versions of CDH4 was included on the Crowbar admin node. I'll do the same thing for the Cloudera Manager repository, except I'm going to change the last part of that custom repository. Instead of being Apache Hadoop, it's going to be Cloudera Manager. I'm going to skip the GPG key URL. I don't need that. When Crowbar configured my machines, it automatically set them all up to be able to log into each other with root, and it's also set them up with the same password. The default password is Crowbar, so I'm going to specify it here. And then I'll start the installation process in Cloudera Manager. What's happening right now is the Cloudera Manager is doing the finalization of all the packages that go out to those nodes. Crowbar did the initial setup. Cloudera Manager is taking care of the final stages of that setup. Okay, my Cloudera Manager and Cloudera components for Hadoop have completed successfully. I can now finish the initial wizard, and the next step here is Cloudera will go off and check all those hosts to make sure they're configured correctly. These tests are going to pass because Crowbar went through and laid down all the correct versions, but it never hurts to run the extra check. Now that I have all the components deployed, I can go out here and start up the necessary services. In my case, I'm just going to run core Hadoop, which is HDFS, MapReduce, Oozie, and Hue. I'm not going to run HBase right now, but that's an alternative, as you can also run all the other services. I have another chance here to go check the various configuration parameters before I start up the services. In my case, most of these parameters were either specified in the bar clamp or were passed along from the bar clamp as part of the configuration. So I'm going to leave these as they were, and then just finalize my cluster configuration. Okay, all the services have been created, and HDFS and all the other components have been formatted and laid down, so I'm pretty much done with my install. This last step here will drop me into the Cloudera Manager, where I can see what's been going on in my system. So I can see that I have HDFS running, I have Hue running, I have MapReduce service running, and I have Oozie running. And then within these individual elements, I can see which nodes are specified here. You'll notice as you go through this stuff, most of the information regarding which nodes are being used was actually passed over from the Crowbar bar clamp and all my earlier allocations, so I didn't have to get into a lot of detail here. It was mostly point and click to set up the rest of this cluster. Now the next step is going to be to run some MapReduce jobs. We'll do that in the next video.